encloses it as a preserve and uses it perhaps only for itself or leaves it idle, that's not going to lead to a productive use of resources, right? So you want this additional condition to hold as well. The last condition is enforceability. Property rights should be secure from seizure or encroachment. And we all know, in many parts of the world, every time there's a revolution, what happens to property rights? They are at risk. One of the big problems with regard to foreign investment, particularly in less developed countries, is the fear that somewhere along the line, if a rule of law doesn't exist and a government doesn't enforce property rights, there can be expropriation. And if there's a significant probability of expropriation, what happens with regard to willing investment? Now, would you invest in Bangladesh if, in fact, you came to the conclusion that the government was corrupt and, moreover, whatever property development that you engaged in could be taken away from you at a moment's notice? You wouldn't make that investment, right? Okay, so those are the three conditions: exclusivity, transferability, and enforceability. And you may see down the road questions or problems in which you've got two but not three of these particular conditions. And the point is, does that affect the actual management of a resource for which there is scarcity rents? Okay, as I noted, assigning these property rights is really a distributional issue. And whenever you assign the property right, what you're doing is giving a scarcity rent to the parties to whom you've made the assignment. If you look throughout the Soviet Union, when the Soviet Union collapsed in the latter part of the 1980s, the governments in certainly Russia and some of the other selected Soviet Republic countries, in effect, took what was formerly state-owned enterprises or enterprise owned by the government, and they ended up assigning it to different individuals. Now, some of it was on the basis of auctions, some of it was on the basis of crony capitalism in which those in power treated their friends, and then there's some evidence down the road that they got side payments back over the course of the next decade or so. But nevertheless, once those rights are assigned, you're going to have more interest in protecting the scarcity rent. You may not like the distributional consequences or the equity consequences. Right? So how should society go about assigning these rights? The natural conclusion among economists is set up a transparent auction, which is run in an honest, transparent way, and allow various parties to bid for a property right with regard to some resource, whatever resource we're talking about. And in the case of Russia and the former Soviet Republic, these weren't necessarily common property resources. These were ongoing enterprises, business enterprises, right? All right. So to auction those off, that generally, if it's well designed, it's efficient, because you would expect, if it is a well-designed auction, that the party with the highest willingness to pay is going to be the winner. And moreover, that party may end up, in an ideal situation, is bidding the equivalent of the scarcity rent. Coming back to our example about Napa versus New Mexico, if in fact the land in Napa was offered up as an auction, you would expect, if you did many of these auctions, that in the long run, the bid price would be equivalent to the scarcity rent that's going to be generated by that higher quality land, right? Okay. And under those circumstances, whoever is the seller of the auction ends up capturing that scarcity rent and uses that as revenues to offset the cost of other programs, hopefully other programs, that result in investing in public goods. Okay? Now, let's turn away and go back and look at externalities and their source of market failure. And we talked about this, defining this in terms of innocent bystanders with regard to the actions of others. Our classic example is, of course, all of our discussion about pollution, but I want to look at a little different example. And from here forward in this lecture, I want to come back to our discussion about deadweight losses and put deadweight losses in the context of some obvious environmental economic problems. Right? And the first example I want to look at is a real-world example in which the Thai government decided that they wanted to become one of the leaders in shrimp farming. So Thailand offered incentives to operators to expand and or enter the industry of growing shrimp, selling them locally, but also selling them globally in the hopes of generating additional foreign exchange for the government of Thailand. But in shrimp farming, to be able to efficiently farm shrimp in the localities within Thailand and throughout much of the world, you have to clear mangroves. Mangroves serve a real interest with regard to dealing with adverse weather conditions, soil erosion. They also provide nurseries for the fish. So they have a lot of positive externalities that they generate. But then the shrimp farmers are coming along and they want to expand, and they have to remove the mangrove. Right? So that's what's happening here. And to make matters even worse, the Thai government wants to expand shrimp production, sweeping under the rug the positive externalities from the mangrove. Okay? And they offered subsidies to the shrimp farmers. So, given those facts, how do we go about analyzing in a straightforward graphic analysis using all the principles that we've discussed up until now in this course? What is the efficiency loss with regard to the clearance of mangroves and the subsidies offered by the Thai government? Okay, let's start with just the private sector. Similar, very familiar graph to you. This is price along the vertical axis. This is the quantity of shrimp that's being produced. Now, there's some demand for that shrimp. Let's suppose this is both the horizontal summation of domestic demand as well as rest of the world demand for shrimp produced in Thailand. And this is the private marginal cost. But that private marginal cost is not the social cost because it doesn't take into account the harm to mangroves. If we take that into account, then we have a social marginal cost that's everywhere above the private marginal cost. And if we look at what the social optimal quantity of shrimp that should be produced, it's Q star. Right? That's the point at which the willingness to pay is equal to the marginal social cost, taking into account the harm that is imposed on mangroves. But the Thai government comes along and offers subsidies. And what do the subsidies do in this simple graph? Yes? Say what? Shift demand up. Who are they paying the subsidies to? Yes, shift it down. What they're going to do is lower the marginal private cost by offering subsidies to the shrimp farmers, right? Okay? But before doing that, and just looking at, suppose we, no, wait a minute, I don't want this yet. What is area A that's here? Pardon? Speak up. The dead weight loss from what? Yes, for not recognizing the social cost and producing at this particular point here, this quantity on this axis instead of Q star, right? Okay. So now let me introduce the second dimension, namely that there is subsidies that are being offered for production of shrimp, and that lowers and moves to the right their marginal cost curve, and now this becomes the new marginal cost curve, and we ask ourselves, what are the dead weight losses now? Once again, always keeping in mind the dead weight losses are driven by the lack of capturing an incremental benefit that is larger than the incremental cost, or vice versa, right? So here, what we have is additional incentives for expanding production, and what will happen is that the shrimp producers will be extending the amount of shrimp production all the way from what was the private equilibrium here at this point out to Q subscript P, which I denoted that is the output with the subsidies. Now what's the dead weight loss? Is it still A, or is it something more than that? Justin, what's the answer? Is there two Justins? You're Justin 2? I'm sorry, I was pointing at that Justin. Okay, from now on you're Justin 2. Okay, who would you prefer to be Justin 1? Go ahead. The area next to it. You mean this area here? When you say next to it, what about this area here? No, that entire area. You're dead right. So it turns out that the two additional areas of dead weight losses are B and C. So to summarize, if shrimp farmers don't have to bear the cost of the externality that they're causing on mangroves, they end up obviously producing too much fish, and under those circumstances we have a dead weight loss of just A. However, if the government offers a subsidy, now the dead weight loss grows from A to A plus B plus C, which we've already illustrated in the prior graph. Okay, now let's turn away from negative externalities and why it causes market failures and look at public goods. Now we have already discussed the categorization of public goods, and we're here in this particular simple chart looking at the four buckets associated with whether a good is excludable or non-excludable and whether the good is rival or non-rival. But what we want to focus on here is public goods, this particular box, namely those goods that are non-excludable and non-rival. Okay? And you had a problem set for today that went directly to the demand for a public good. And let's look at a simple example in which there are a number of people within society that place a positive value on some public good. Alina, thank you. Why don't you explain the next few graphs that I'm about to put up here?
So you have to add vertices for
right.
in order to get the demand for
Right. That's correct. But why? Why are you adding it vertically?
because you're adding the price. Or you're adding
Yeah, but still, I'm looking for something more fundamental about why I'm adding vertically. Why for a private good, for example, do I sum the demands horizontally, and why do I turn to a public good and I add all the demands from different groups or different individuals vertically? I'm not going to let you go. So don't. What does the non-excludability mean? And what does the non-rivalry mean? Right. And my use doesn't alter the availability for you to use it. That's why it's vertical. I mean, it's as simple as that. And if you stop and think about it for a moment, and you're adding up the various demands, say, wait a minute, if A uses the good, but B can still come along and use that same good. So it makes good sense that the addition has to be vertical. And that's exactly what we're going to do here. This is group A, that's the demand. You've already done this on your problem set. I'm sure you've all got it right, so I want to move through this very quickly. So this is person B, and then we go through the process of adding their two respective demands to get to the market demand. And mechanically, all I'm showing in this graph is what needs to be done to get the right points along the demand curve for this public good. Right? Mechanically, it's clear. Don't lose sight of why. Don't lose sight of why that is the right answer. Okay, now that's one thing to isolate the demand. Remember when we went through non-market goods and we talked about revealed preference and then stated preference, the purpose for all of that was to get at a demand curve which tells you what the willingness to pay is, right? But it doesn't tell you what the optimal provision of that public good is. It just tells you what the demand is that's out there that you need before you can make a determination of what the efficient amount of the public good that should be offered. And this is done, quite obviously, I need something else. What else do I need to be able to make this choice? Okay, Justin 2, what else do I need? To determine the optimal provision of the public good, what else do I need aside from the right, exactly. The marginal cost associated with providing that public good. And if I have that marginal cost, then I can proceed to determine what is the optimal amount of the public good that I'm going to offer to the marketplace. And for the sake of simplicity, let's presume that marginal cost is constant, and as a result, the optimal provision of that public good is Q star, right? Okay. And moreover, because of the free rider problem that we previously discussed, this calls for the active engagement of the public sector, because the private sector or private markets will not provide the efficient amount of that public good. Right? And that's all due to the free rider problem and the lack of appropriability. You can't capture the value that's created by the availability of that public good. Moreover, if we're going to have a total societal demand for the public good, we also have to include non-use values, right, and option values as well. And those, as we've noted in last Thursday's lecture, are not priced in private markets. Let's take an active learning example. How many of you know anything about, how many of you have heard of the Nature Conservancy? A lot of you. Right. What about the Trust for Public Lands? Okay. These are two organizations that are actively engaged in conservation and preservation. What they attempt to do is take pristine lands or properties that have aesthetic value and change the property rights, buy them from the current owner. And there's some tax incentive for the current owner to transfer it to, say, the Nature Conservancy or the Trust for Public Lands, less than its current market value. Right? And they get the tax offset as the difference between what its current market value is versus what amount they gifted to the Nature Conservancy. So what I've got here is a brief description of the Nature Conservancy, the history of the organization. What its purpose is basically preservation, focusing on aesthetic values, and the Trust for Public Lands does much the same. The Nature Conservancy has been very innovative and creative. As of 2006, they held the property rights or the right, certainly, to prohibiting development of these lands of 117 million acres of forests, marshes, prairies, inland islands around the world. They did one very creative swap in Bolivia. In Bolivia was faced with large external debt. The Nature Conservancy, through altruism, got enough in the way of resources to write down the debt of the Bolivian country or government. And the benefit of the bargain was that the Nature Conservancy got then control over the property rights of some scarce, pristine resources in the country of Bolivia. So, I mean, that's the sort of thing that they do. And moreover, the active learning question that I have for you is, can the Nature Conservancy or other organizations like it, other nonprofit organizations, the Trust for Public Lands, by the way, I know a fair amount about this. I've served on the board for the Nature Conservancy, and my youngest daughter, worked for the Trust for Public Lands 15 years after she got her degree here at Berkeley in EAP, before it was EAP, and then went on to Yale and got her graduate degree, and has worked for the Trust for Public Lands all these years. And she's very proud of the fact that, you know that Hollywood sign? Did I already tell you the story? I did. This is not a good thing. When you get older, you have a tendency to tell the same story over and over again. In any event, the question I have for you, can the Nature Conservancy provide the socially optimal amount? Biodiversity is a public good. Right? It's a public good. It has option value, real option value, because you might discover something in some local site, like the yew tree. Does anybody know what the yew tree is? It's a tree that was regarded in forests throughout the western United States as a weed, until somebody discovered that in its bark was the active ingredient for a pharmaceutical drug that would cure certain types of cancer. Suddenly, everybody was preserving the yew tree. Right? Okay, so the question is, can it provide the socially optimal amount of biodiversity? Using this nonprofit organization, they're really using the private market, right? Because they're going out and buying from sellers this land and basically then actively engaging in its preservation and conservation. Visit with your neighbor, give it some thought, and let me know what the answer is. So, Kate, what's the answer? Kate, what's the answer? No? Why not?